Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling one of the biggest, most dramatic questions of the 20th century. Why did the mighty Soviet Empire suddenly collapse?
So let's just start with that central question, right? How does a superpower, a global force that dominated half the world for decades, just disappear? I mean, between 1989 and 1991, it essentially vanished. It's a story that literally redrew the world map.
Well, here's the thing. There's no simple, one-line answer. The collapse wasn't caused by a single event. It was what you could call a perfect storm, a powerful combination of long-term problems and short-term triggers that all came together at exactly the right moment. So let's dive in.
Okay, to really get this, we have to look at the cracks that have been forming for decades. And the biggest one, the deepest one, the economy. It was just fundamentally rotten from the inside. You see, the Soviet command economy, and rigid doesn't even begin to cover it, meant the government controlled literally everything. Prices, production, you name it. That meant there was zero incentive for a factory to get better or try something new. And what did that lead to? Well, you've probably seen the pictures, right? Endless lines for everything, from bread to shoes. The quality of life just couldn't hold a candle to the West.
And this chart, it just lays it all out so clearly. Look at where all the money was going. A massive chunk for the military, trying to keep up with the US in the arms race, another huge chunk to keep control over Eastern Europe, and what was left for, regular people? Almost nothing.
So this is really important to understand. The bad economy on its own didn't make the Soviet Union fall. What it did do was destroy any belief people had left in the communist system. It was like a forest that hadn't seen rain in years, just dry, dead wood everywhere, waiting for a single spark to set the whole thing ablaze.
And then, in 1985, that spark arrived. A new kind of leader took charge, Mikhail Gorbachev. He looked at all these cracks in the system and thought, I can fix this, and he gambled on two really radical new policies.
Okay, so first up was perestroika, which basically means restructuring. His idea was to try and kickstart the dead economy by allowing a few private businesses, a little bit of capitalism really, to try and get things moving again. But the second idea, glasnost, or openness, whoa. This was a game changer. For the first time in forever, really, people could actually criticize the government out loud. All the failures, all the corruption, it all started to pour out into the open.
But honestly, the biggest move he made wasn't even about the economy. He got rid of what was called the Brezhnev Doctrine. What that means is he was sending a clear message to the satellite states in Eastern Europe, we're not sending in the tanks anymore. You're on your own. That threat that had hung over them for decades, poof, it was gone. And this is the incredible irony of the whole story, right? Gorbachev wasn't trying to destroy the Soviet Union, not at all. He was a true believer in communism. He was trying to save it. But by trying to fix it, he accidentally kicked out the two things holding it all together, fear and total control.
So what happens when you take away that fear? Well, that storm we've been talking about, it finally hit. And man, did it hit hard, all across Eastern Europe.
I mean, the speed of it all was just unbelievable. It was like dominoes falling in fast forward. First, Poland gets free elections. Then Hungary literally cuts a hole in the Iron Curtain. And then the big one, the Berlin Wall. It wasn't knocked down by an army, it was pushed over by ordinary people. One country after another, all in a matter of months.
And that's the key takeaway here. This wave of revolutions, most of them totally peaceful, was the direct result of Gorbachev's gamble. It proved that the only thing holding the Soviet Empire together in Europe was the threat of violence. Once that was gone, the whole thing just fell apart.
Okay, so people power was the engine of this change. But there were other forces pushing too, both from the outside world and from deep inside the Soviet Union itself. Let's look at those.
On the outside, you have US President Ronald Reagan, and his approach was fascinating. Early on, he went hard-line, calling the USSR an evil empire, ramping up military spending, basically daring them to keep up, knowing their economy couldn't handle it. But then later on, he did a total 180 and actually worked with Gorbachev to bring down the tension.
And it wasn't just Reagan. You had other key allies, like Margaret Thatcher in the UK. She famously said Gorbachev was someone we can do business with, which was a huge deal. It helped build the trust they needed to make all this change happen peacefully.
But the fatal blow, the one that actually killed the Soviet Union itself, that came from the inside. Remember glasnost, that policy of openness? Well, it opened a Pandora's box.
All of a sudden, these nationalist movements inside the 15 Soviet republics, places like Lithuania, Ukraine, Georgia, they exploded. They didn't want a better Soviet Union, they wanted out.
All right, let's pull it all together. Let's deconstruct that perfect storm and see how all the pieces fit.
So, you can really think of it in 4 stages. Step 1, you have this really weak economy that makes everyone lose faith in the system. Step 2, Gorbachev comes in and his reforms basically remove the lid of fear and control. Step 3, that allows people power to just erupt, knocking over the communist governments in Eastern Europe. And then, the final step, nationalism from within just shatters the Union into pieces. It was a chain reaction.
Which leaves us with this huge question to chew on, right? Was Mikhail Gorbachev the guy who single-handedly brought down an empire? Or was the whole thing a house of cards ready to fall, and he was just the man who happened to open a window and let in a breeze? It's something historians still debate today.